All right.
All right. Take a drink.
All right. Yeah. I got my cup of Joe here. Fuck. Coffee's hot. This just in. From the home office. You keep coffee in a thermal mug and it's going to stay hot. Hey everyone, it's Elliot.
And Todd. Welcome to Two Designers Walk Into a Bar, an ongoing conversation about pop culture and iconic design. Today, we're going to be talking about game show logos, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
That was ugly. And sometimes how all of those qualities could be found in a single piece of artwork.
Okay, we're zeroing in on a couple that are loud, busy, and colorful, just like the era they were created in and the sets they were created for.
So grab the remote and ask the bartender for a couple of slot machine cocktails.
And join us once again as we spin the wheel and roll the dice right here in the bar. So we're talking, wow, game shows. What a pretty fertile pasture there, right? There's been
there's a lot of shit in the pasture.
Yeah. You caught that. You caught that metaphor,
that oblique,
huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Not quite so. But let me look up the definition of oblique. I'm sure that was right there at it, but it's good. Lot of visuals.
Yeah. So let's let the audience in on a little, I don't know, secret confession, whatever. This was your idea. So this was my really idea. Zeroing in on game shows. And I can understand why, I can understand why to a point, from a pop culture perspective, certainly. But I think there's some people that are like, hey guys, you may have forgotten this is a design podcast. So why are we talking about game shows? So as we get into this, maybe wasn't there a game show called Defend Your Life? So
I don't know.
I'm going to say, Todd, defend your choice as we get into this.
Well, so you know how in our history of this podcast, we have danced with the highbrow and the lowbrow, sometimes at the same time.
Yeah, sometimes it's a beautiful waltz. Other times we're grinding on the dance floor.
There you go. Couldn't have said that any more metaphorically either. In this case, we had a couple episodes where we talked about stamps and, the beauty of those things and their little pieces of artwork and also the utilitarian use of those things. And I got to thinking, okay, I was watching the Game Show Network. Let me just confess. and I thought, not every design is beautiful, but it certainly conveys a conceptual takeaway, and it certainly conveys a message about its thing. And I think that's important too. And of course, my mind, probably like yours, Elliot, went back to the heyday of game shows, which was like 70s and 80s, I think, when they were, to use one of my favorite words, they were a little more untethered then, I think.
Yeah, TV, I mean, certainly the country, pop culture in general, we've visited that era a number of times. For folks who have listened to this podcast before, they know that you and I are 10 years apart in age. I was born in the early 70s, so I have very fond memories. Truly, my formative years were parked in front of a TV watching these surreal shows. And it was to the point, I don't want to deviate too much. One time I was at work, and another coworker and I, another designer at the time, and I, who are the same age, we were talking to a guy who was like 10 or so years younger than us, and we started to talk about some of the shows that were on in the 70s and early 80s, including one of the shows I'm going to talk about in just a minute.
Okay.
And he was totally convinced, based on, current TV at that time. He was completely and utterly convinced we were making everything up. Things
I can
being
see.
oversized, just the people wearing costumes, some of the performances, what the hosts were doing. He's like, there is no and this is in the age of like early social media, early YouTube. We weren't kind of in the surreal place where we are now with TikTok and everything. Although I think there are probably still a lot of people who wouldn't believe some of the things today. I think people tend to believe the past was always more reserved than the present, right?
Well, we tend to try to process things of the past through the filter of today. And, game shows today are they're big budget affairs. They're gigantic budget affairs. Like You Want to Be a Millionaire. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I should have said. And, the sets are dramatic and the music is intense. So it's a little, I think it would be hard for like your friend to understand that back in the day, it was on television, but it was not as highbrow,
or high budget, right? It didn't mean
high budget, yeah.
It didn't mean there
it
was
did what
a
they
lot
had to do, right?
Yeah.
And all right, so why don't you jump in? I would bet my dollars to donuts here that I know the show that you're going to talk about because you've mentioned it as one of your favorites for a long time.
Yeah, there's no mystery here, but let's see if you can guess it anyway.
Oh, okay.
A very entertaining show. There were a lot of entertainers, some of whom actually later became household names, Todd.
Okay.
And the name of the show was that when people, let's say, weren't performing at their best, the name of the show was a dead giveaway in terms of how they were going to be asked to leave. And it was an audio cue, shall we say. So if that isn't a dead giveaway.
I'm okay. All right, Alex, what is the Gong Show for 200?
Yeah, no mystery
ding,
here.
Ding,
yeah.
ding, ding.
To this day, I love the Gong Show. And on our episode page, we'll have to put some clips from the Gong Show in its heyday. And that's really the time. The Gong Show is kind of there was an attempt at resurrecting it recently, but I think it didn't really go anywhere.
It was of the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's, I think, what I was about to say. I think that it was the perfect thing for the perfect moment. So I want to talk about the Gong Show, and I want to really talk about the person the Gong Show sprang from, because this guy, as zany as the Gong Show is, when we talk about the creator of the Gong Show, everyone's gonna be like, oh yeah, well that adds up. So I want to talk about a guy named Chuck Barris.
Yeah.
And so who was this cat, and how did he bring the Gong Show to life? So Chuck Barris was an American television producer, game show creator, obviously, and he was a host, and he was also, Todd, an author. I'll get to that in a minute, because actually there's a fairly contemporary movie that people may have heard of, but they might not know how it was related to the Gong Show. So this guy, he's no longer with us. He was born in Philadelphia back in 1929, and he passed away in 2017 in a town just outside of New York City. So he starts his career at NBC, and he was a page at NBC. And so for those of you who don't know what that means, it's sort of like, I don't know, you're kind of like an intern / gopher, right?
Yeah,
you're sort of like
a runner.
Shepherding people into the building or shepherding people onto the set when there are, guests coming in for shows, whatever. And then he later worked at ABC as a standards and practices person for American Bandstand. And knowing what I'm about to say, I loved that he worked as a standards and practices guy, because I think this definitely informed some of what he knew he could and couldn't get away with on network TV. So he created some other hit game shows prior to the Gong Show, like The Dating Game. I think everybody's heard of The Dating Game. So that was in 1965.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he created that. And then you can probably imagine where this went next with the Newlywed Game the following year, right? So people date, they get married, and it doesn't mean the madcap antics have to end, Todd.
I didn't know he created both of those. That's amazing. I love those shows.
I want to share an amazing and talking about budgets and talking about concepts for I feel like I need to share this quote he had in an interview later, much later. He said that the Newlywed Game was the easiest program that he had developed because, quote, all I needed was 4 couples, 8 questions, and a washer dryer, unquote. So it's just like just give away a prize. I just need some doofuses and just talking to each other on TV for the amusement of the audience. Okay, so I mentioned standards and practices. So he was known for his unconventional and boundary pushing style in television, right? Because you can look up, and maybe we'll put some of these on our website as well. So the Newlywed Game, the dating game, there is some sort of like the contestants. They're not going to have. Let's just say, Mensa members were not on these shows, right? You kind of wanted these, oblivious housewives, these sort of, dumb jock, blockhead guys. So some of the questions that were being asked and some of the responses, these folks inadvertently slipped and fell into hilarity, right? So maybe we'll put some of those moments on our episode page as well. We'll see what we can dig up. Barris also wrote 3 novels and 4 memoirs, and one of which, called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, that was published in 1984, that was turned into a movie with Sam Rockwell playing Chuck Barris. You might remember it. What's great, for those of you who maybe haven't seen the movie or haven't read the book, he claimed that when he wasn't filming the Gong Show, when he wasn't working on that, he was doing wet work for the CIA. Like on the weekends, he was getting dropped into, behind enemy lines, so to speak, and doing assassination work. He was a hired hitman for the federal government, and then he would return on Monday and film the next week of the Gong Show.
It'd be like, where is the weirdest place you made whoopee? He wrote that.
Where's the weirdest place you ever iced a dictator, or whatever.
I had no idea that's what wet work meant, by the way. But
he was a hitman. So,
okay.
Yeah. So, it wasn't like, a wading pool on a game show stage, Todd. I hate to shatter that illusion for you.
There's a concept
Jello,
for us.
Nothing, So he was also a songwriter, and Todd, in the poetry that is the pop culture universe we live within, one of the songs he wrote was later covered by the Ramones.
Stop it.
I'm not making that up. Yes.
No.
So this guy has some pop culture bona fides, right? It's hard to argue with everything we've just talked about. Okay. So let's clear the stage.
And all of that is not even mentioning the Gong Show yet.
So let's clear the runway and let's talk about the Gong Show.
Okay.
Like, where did the Gong Show come from? I, as I mentioned, grew up in the 70s. My parents both have pretty good senses of humor, and they, I think, were in on the joke, and they were always watching the Gong Show. And as a little kid, it's really interesting, right? I think the Gong Show and I met at just the right time, because if you think about the surreal nature of like children's stories and things like the Muppet Show, or you've got people talking with puppets and, puppets playing musical instruments and just all this crazy stuff that was happening in the 70s. So the leap to, quote unquote, adult entertainment, shall we say, or more adult entertainment, really wasn't that huge of a leap if you're a little kid in the 70s watching this stuff, right? So that's sort of where I found myself. So I'd be parked in front of, I think at the time we had like a black and white TV with rabbit ears on it. We were tuning in the Gong Show. So the Gong Show was launched in 1976, and it was knowingly a chaotic and absurd talent competition. And this is how much of an impact the show had. Originally, it ran for only 2 seasons on NBC.
Really?
Yeah, from 1976 to 78. And I think it was really because network execs either didn't get it or, again, the boundary pushing we talked about, right? But then it ran 4 more years. It was picked up in syndication. So they were rerunning, those same shows, but then they were also producing new shows. But yeah, the original was off the air by 1980.
Wow.
So the show featured a mix of talented and like genuinely talented, like not talented in air quotes here, and bizarrely bad performers, right? Like people knowingly who were bad, but kind of the William Hungs of their era, right? And we'll return to that in a minute. They were put on the air just because, for the benefit of the studio audience and the viewers at home, they were terrible. So judges, there were always celebrity judges, 3 celebrity judges. They could end the acts early because there was a giant gong behind them. And so, they could always, if an act was really, really terrible, fingernails on a chalkboard, they could jump up and, slam this gong. And then if the act was good, they would have magic markers and they would have white cards in front of them. And then, they would issue a score and they would, put the card up and talk about, defend their score, like why they thought these people should win a prize.
I seem to remember that the celebrity judges would ham it up too. Like when there was an act that 100%. Could be gong, like they would sort of battle over the gong.
Oh, they would wrestle each other away from it, right? Yeah. When one of the 3 knowingly hated it, and it was quite obvious to the other 2 it was getting on that person's nerves, they would make their way toward the gong. They would, pick up the mallet to bang the gong, and then that was the official. Until the gong sounded, the person could keep going. That was sort of the rule. So these guys would wrestle one another. I say guys in quotes because there were female judges as well. They would all wrestle each other and to make sure the gong wouldn't be rung, just to watch the other people suffer. So you have this Chuck Barris. He's laughing. He's on one side of the stage laughing because the act is so bad. He's put this act on. You have the act itself that's happening on stage, and the audience is booing or things are getting thrown at the performers, sometimes from off the stage. And then you have the judges who are wrestling each other so the gong wouldn't be rung. So this is all happening at the same time. And this was, this is just like mass cast. It's kind of like a game show version of Jerry Springer or something. I don't know. Yeah. So all this is happening. And so judges could hit the gong or, let it ride or whatever. And so Barris, is sort of the ringmaster, right? He's overseeing all of this. He's this manic and unpredictable dude, totally adding to and capitalizing on the show's energy. So let's talk about what was going on. What was he doing? So Cass is breaking out either on stage, over with the judges, maybe both. So he really embraced, he built this thing, so he embraced the show's eccentricity by using unusual props and wearing colorful and quirky clothing, right? So he always had things like these strange hats. He would always have these oversized hats. He'd pull them down nearly over his eyes while the people were performing. Then he'd start dancing, but he's dancing erratically to the side. Imagine if Bob Barker on The Price is Right while someone is, trying to hit a hole in one on the putting green or playing Plinko or whatever. He's over there dancing, wearing a goofy hat. It was truly crazy. So it got to the point that apparently viewers would write in wondering if he was doing the show drunk. Wondering if he was drinking and then showing up and then he's, just being crazy. But by being a performer himself, by him hamming it up and doing it in this sort of environment of chaos, he ended up being a cult hero himself. So it's very hard to separate Chuck Barris from the Gong Show. It's really a hand in glove relationship, right? Yeah. So this guy was really well adored by the fans, and he was nicknamed, the fans called him Chucky Baby. Hey, Chucky Baby, which I think again is great. Very 70s, very loud 70s. Jack. Yeah. And his energy, his offbeat style matched the show's, this just wild and goofy. Again, he wanted good television. So he would find these amateur performers, these people who, I would love to see the outtakes. I would love to see the people who didn't make the cut, for one reason or another. And then the judges. There was always, as we mentioned, this rotating panel of 3 judges. And look up some of these folks from the 70s folks, some of whom listeners will be familiar with, others maybe not so much. So Jamie Farr, Klinger from MASH.
Klinger from MASH, yeah.
The comedian, the gal, J.P. Morgan, Artie Johnson, Rip Taylor, Phyllis Diller. So all these sort of comedians, sitcom stars, people who would be on talk shows of the time.
Great improvisers, all of them.
Yeah, it was sort of like Hollywood Squares, right? You wanted to kind of set the stage and then let these people be the most over-the-top versions of themselves.
Right.
So let's talk about the regulars. They would have these acts who would come in, but they would also have these regular performers. And a lot of times these were actually crew members who were just coming on stage as characters. And makes sense. They're already getting paid. They're already in the studio. Get these people on stage too. So
Chucky Baby knew how to use a budget, right?
Yeah, 100%. He was wringing every last dollar out. Yeah. Todd, I have two favorites. I've talked to you about these privately. I've talked to you about these, outside the podcast. So my first favorite, and I distinctly remember both of these people from growing up. So my first favorite is the Unknown Comic. So you remember the Unknown Comic?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I absolutely love the Unknown Comic.
The bag over the head.
So he was actually a real comedian, this guy named Murray Langston, but he performed he was in a suit, kind of like a leisure suit from the era, and he had a paper bag over his head. So that's how he was unknown, right? Like no one knew his identity. And then he would have just the worst jokes he was telling. And then he had cutouts in the paper bag, right, for his eyes and for his mouth. It's just amazing. But my favorite, and Todd, you know this story, but I'll say it anyway. So Gene the Dancing Machine. We got to talk about Gene the Dancing Machine. So this is a guy named Gene Patton. He was a stagehand, and he danced whenever the band, because there was a band for this game. All great game shows also have a band. So the band would play Jumping at the Woodside, and curtain would go up, and Gene the Dancing Machine would be on there, just doing his little soft shoe routine, and then stuffed animals would be getting thrown at him like from both sides of it. And I remember being a little kid, and because stuffed animals were toys to me, and I just remember turning to my dad and saying, like, why are they throwing all these stuffed animals out there? And my dad's like, it's because they hate him, but they don't really hate him, and they love him, so it's not fruits and vegetables, it's stuffed animal. I'm like,
I love that your dad is trying to explain
rationalize
the absurdity
it, right?
of what was happening.
And but as a little kid, I'm like, well, okay, logic holds up, with all the other stuff. So Gene the Dancing Machine, he was beloved, right? He's a cultural icon.
Yes,
so
he
even
was.
After the Gong Show ended, NBC tour guides, when they were going through NBC, they would still point him out, even when he was working backstage on other stuff. So, Todd, can we talk about the ironic end to poor Gene?
I really wish you would. I really wish you would. Okay. We're not eating lunch, so you should be safe on this one.
Yeah. Poor Gene.
Poor Gene.
He ended up getting diabetes, and I shouldn't be laughing.
That's not the funny part.
I know I'm going to hell for saying what I'm saying. He had Gene ended up getting both his legs amputated. Oh, God.
I'm sorry, Gene's
family of Gene the Dancing Machine. We're keep our seats warm in hell, Gene. We'll see you there. Anyway, then there were these funny one-off acts.
Oh, but hold on. Aren't you gonna give the line though? That
okay,
was,
okay, yeah. So I think it's been erased.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, at one time on Wikipedia, when you looked up the biography of Gene the Dancing Machine, the way it ended, it said, in a rather ironic coda, Gene had both his legs amputated due to diabetes.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
We're going to hell.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Oh.
All our friends and listeners will be there.
But we love Gene the Dancing.
Oh, yeah. Machine. I mean, truly. Yeah. We'll definitely honor Gene. We'll put some clips
absolutely.
of Gene. I mean, yeah. I say this with I'm not throwing shade at Gene. I love Gene. It's just life.
Yeah.
Life sometimes, tees up these humorous curveballs, right? Okay, so let's get into the one-off acts. So we're talking about some of the regulars. There was real talent, but there was also some dubious talent. Okay. So one guy on there was a dentist who would play Stars and Stripes Forever, like a really good rendition of it, using his dental drill on stage.
Wow.
there was another act called Scarlett and Rhett's Vulgar Poetry. And so they would start reciting these really, really dirty poems on the air. And then every other word was basically bleeped. So you never really knew what they were saying. You know, especially, again, me as a little kid, I'd think, why are they beeping like, this doesn't make any sense. A little kid in the 70s didn't have a lot of context clues. Todd, let's talk about the Popsicle Twins. What do you say?
I do remember them.
Yeah, I'll
yes.
bet you do. Two teenage girls who sucked on the frozen treats in let's call it what it is, a decidedly sexual manner. So the Popsicle Twins, again, we talked about standards and practices and decency and all this stuff. The Popsicle Twins somehow slipped past all the censors. So they would get on stage and no one had a problem with them. But get this, apparently there was an exotic dancer with a passion for tarantulas, and that was deemed too hot for television. So that got, so I know you love exotic dancers, and we've talked about how you love the movie Tarantula, but...
yeah, well, that would have been perfect, wouldn't it, for me?
Well, not in this era, apparently. That was a bridge too far. Okay. And then when Barris would announce the final score, there is a little person, to be politically correct, named Jerry Marin, who actually, again, pop culture works in mysterious ways. He was a munchkin in The Wizard of Oz.
What?
Swear to God.
Oh, man.
He would come on stage in a top hat and tails and throw confetti, and balloons would drop overhead for the winner, right? So you had a munchkin coming out, a tuxedo-clad munchkin, as balloons are raining down. I mean, again, the surreal nature of the show is amazing.
This sounds like a Freddie Mercury party.
Yeah, maybe. Or it should be our podcast party. We need to do that.
There you go. There you go. We should.
I think all the munchkins are dead now, though, so I'm not sure.
Unfortunately.
Maybe we can get some wrestlers. We can get.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Look at it this way, Todd. Think about all the money we'll save because we don't have to make the cake they'll jump out of as large. We'll save a bunch of money in our cake budget. So there's that. So, as you can imagine, TV critics hated this show. Right? This was everything that was wrong with television. Even in the 70s, this is everything that was wrong with television, right? But of course, in true pop culture form, viewers loved it. Like, viewers are like, this is great. Like, because they're just tuning in for entertainment, right? They're never going to confuse the Gong Show for Masterpiece Theater.
Right.
As I mentioned, there actually were some legitimately talented entertainers on the show. And we'll see, Todd, how many of these folks you've heard of and how many our listeners have heard of, okay?
All right.
Have you ever heard of a guy, Paul somebody, he later became Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens.
Paul Rubens. Yeah.
So you can see early Paul Rubens, pre-Pee Wee Paul Rubens, performing a comedy act with another guy, with a comedy partner on the show.
I'm sorry, you just said pre-Pee Wee.
Pre-Pee Wee. Say that five times fast.
Yeah. All right. Sorry for the interruption. I just had to point out you said pre-Pee Wee.
I articulated correctly. What's your
you did. Okay, no,
jeez, everyone's a
funny string of words.
Just like the Gong Show, everyone's a critic. Andrea McArdle, so she ended up being the original Annie on Broadway and appeared as a young singer on the Gong Show prior to that before her big break. So that helped her get discovered, right? So from the Gong Show to Broadway, not a bad leap. Do you remember a band, Todd, called something Boingo?
Oingo Boingo. Yeah.
So Danny Elfman, Oingo Boingo, Dead Man's Party. They actually had a cameo in a movie I love, Back to School, with our friend Rodney Dangerfield. So Oingo Boingo, then known as the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, their full name, they ended up winning the competition one time on the Gong Show. So they won the prize. So I guess the Munchkin came on stage for them. And they later, as we all know, became a successful rock band. And then Elfman, of course, went on to be an amazing film composer and still is today. He works with, good Lord.
Tim Burton.
Yeah, Tim Burton. I'm like blanking on the name. Boxcar Willie, Todd, I know
No.
that's your nickname. I'm going to start calling you Boxcar Willie.
I would be honored.
I'm calling you Bar Car Willie. How about that?
Bar Car, yeah, I'd be honored.
Yeah, so the country music singer, again, he was on there. You remember the Monkees, Todd? You remember
Yes,
speaking
of course.
of amazing TV? So Mickey Dolenz, he performed on the show after the Monkees ended. And then some guy, some comic who ended up, he's hosted Saturday Night Live a million times. He was in the Three Amigos. Some guy named Steve Martin.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't a contestant on the show, but just like Saturday Night Live, he made guest appearances as a celebrity judge early in his career when his stand-up was just getting started. So we've talked about Chuck Barris. We've talked about the experience of the Gong Show, sort of the, the zeitgeist governing it. So this is a design podcast, as we've mentioned. So let's talk about the logo. So the logo itself is bold and playful. It's a design that really, I think, captures the show's chaotic energy in all its over-the-top glory, right? So it's this gong-like circle, and it has colorful diamonds radiating out from the center, sort of ringing this logo in a sunburst-style shape, right? So imagine like the sound waves or the clang of the gong and like this burst coming out. And then in the middle of the logo, the Gong Show, the name of the show, is featured in this thick, chunky, bedazzled Art Deco lettering. I don't know if it's high design exactly, but it's certainly eye-catching. It's attention-getting. And they use these warm colors. Again, this was the 70s, right? This was when colors like bronze and gold and white, very much reflecting this sort of 70s aesthetic. And it was built, right? It was this layered, multi-dimensional look because it had to have these shadows and this dimensionality for TV. So they weren't thinking about this as, well, gee, how is this going to look on a web page or a phone? They were thinking about how is it going to look on a shitty black and white or, tweaked out early 70s color television. But I think it did a really great job of integrating with the show's aesthetic, right? So as we've talked about, it matches the Gong Show's loud and colorful and over-the-top set design, which, of course, matched the loud, colorful, and over-the-top performers and judges and hosts and everything. Bright colors, oversized props, flashing lights, bold stage direction, just really this chaotic carnival-like atmosphere that Chuck Barris created. And I think as a little kid, all of that chaos and eye candy is just why I loved it so much.
Yeah, of course.
It was chaos. It was a cartoon come to life, right? Yeah. So these theatrical set elements, and it was wild. It was low budget. It was the 70s, but it was this variety act, right? So when you think about people and TikTok or YouTube videos and like getting bored and going on to the next thing, the Gong Show in a way sort of predicted that, I would say, right? Because there was always something new coming up, kept viewers tuning in. So the aesthetic overall, it was this unpredictable, anything goes kind of spirit. So when it comes to game show logos, as we sort of wrap up my professed love of the Gong Show, you're not going to find often, it's not like some branding agency necessarily, certainly not in the 70s. It's not like Massimo Vignelli says, yes, the Gong Show, So it's not like the bicentennial logo that we've talked about and we love from that same time period. So I had to do a little bit of digging to figure out who designed this logo. And from what I can figure out, I think it was two folks. Person named letter E, like E period, J, J-A-Y, Krause, and Lynn Griffin. And I think the two of them designed it as part of the larger set.
Okay.
And I think for folks who view things today, again, you mentioned we always judge things through the contemporary lens for obvious reasons.
Right.
The William Hungs of the world, all these American Idol outtakes or, The Voice or all of these performance-based, quote-unquote, reality game kind of shows, all those bad auditions, I think those are all children of the Gong Show. I think the Gong Show figured out that they just had this low-budget sort of unwitting brilliance on their hand that would appeal to people. And they weren't making something for TV critics or design critics. They were making something for people who, I think very much like Mad Magazine, were in on the joke.
Yeah.
No one was stumbling on the Gong Show and saying, I don't get it, right? Like, I think it was this moment.
They weren't looking to sign a record contract and get the next superstar. They were just entertaining people for a half an hour.
Yeah.
It had no further purpose than that.
Right. And I think the fact, once it, either on network TV or syndication, we had this happening all over the country. These people were coming into everybody's living room. Todd, let's bang the gong once for our friends over at the Gong Show. I love the Gong Show.
Speaking of banging the gong.
Are you trying to get the bartender's attention?
No. I'm trying to figure out how much longer you're going to last on this show.
You know, I'm just too entertaining for that. In fact, I just looked behind curtain number 2 and... I
know. Our next round of drinks is waiting for me to grab them.
See... finishing each other's thoughts. A perfect match.
Yeah, well, we'll be right back, folks. Hi. We want to take a moment to mention that if you're enjoying this episode, we have an archive of topics ranging from the Olympics to movie posters.
Think Ghostbusters.
Iconic images.
Think Bigfoot.
Punk music.
The Ramones.
Saturday morning cartoons.
The Pink Panther.
And failed products like OK Soda. Visit our website at twodesignerswalkintoabar.com for full episode notes and visuals, the latest blog content, and to sign up for our newsletter.
Follow us on social media. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Find the links on our website or search using the phrase 2 designers walk into a bar.
Most importantly, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people like you find podcasts like this.
And tell a friend about us. Send them a link to our podcast from your listening platform of choice.
And if you're inclined, buy our merchandise. Stickers, coasters, magnets, t-shirts. We're designers. We make good stuff, and it helps support the show.
Get in touch. Use the contact form on our website or send an email to hello@twodesignerswalkintoabar.com.
We read every message we get. Honest.
And we're available for speaking gigs. Email us to learn more.
Okay, now, back to the bar. Welcome back, everybody. The first part of our episode today was kind of a rocking, chaotic time talking about the Gong Show and both Elliot and my memories of the show and laughing at the absurdity and the chaos. And I also brought a game show to the bar today. I'm going to say not as chaotic, but had some similar sensibilities around the same time period, both from an aesthetic as well as the celebrity panel and things like that. So
seems like this was a popular sort of recipe, right?
It was a way to break some celebrities and keep them under contract
or make them seem maybe a little more human.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it was a PR move.
Oh,
and,
100%.
When none of us knew it, we just thought, oh, okay, well, Fannie Flagg is showing up for the day here. But anyway, okay. So I'm going to talk about Match Game. You know Match Game, right, Elliot?
I do. I will admit I've only watched a handful of episodes of it. You know, I'm not a Match Game devotee like I am with the Gong Show.
Well, I can see that. Some people are. And let me just be candid and say I'm not either, but when we were talking about game shows, this one popped in my head and I couldn't get it out because of just the vibe it was, and I'll get into that in a second. But for those of you who maybe haven't seen it, it's a game. It features real people contestants trying to match fill in the blank answers that are given by a celebrity panel. The game actually started in 1962 as part of NBC's daytime lineup, and that initial run lasted until 1969. And then it returned in 1973 to CBS with significant changes. So more celebrities on the panel, larger cash prizes, and more emphasis on humor and little risque double entendre questions to fill in.
So when you say larger cash prizes, do you mean like those oversized checks that people get?
I mean, they got like from $5 to $20, maybe $50. But,
Man, okay.
But yeah. I mean, they could probably, maybe backstage they filled it out in a large oversized check.
You know what?
We can go with that.
If they had a little person like the Gong Show and then had an oversized check, those folks would think they were millionaires.
That'd be amazing. That's really messing with our sensibilities.
You know, we should start a game show. I think that's really the takeaway from this.
I think we should bring back a combination of the Gong Show and Match Game.
Oh, yeah.
We need a new dancer, stagehand. But anyway, we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah,
so.
okay.
But let me tell you, you know who to thank for this resurgence of Match Game is our boy Fred Silverman, who was head of CBS at the time.
Okay.
And you know what? There's a couple threads you've already pulled with Chuck Barris and the pop culture collection there.
All right, hit me.
Freddie Silverman. He was responsible for the rural purge of CBS.
Yes.
Remember, you talked about that on an earlier episode when we were talking about the Dukes of Hazzard.
Yes.
They were not part of the rural purge. They were
the
part of the rural
resurgence,
return.
I would say.
Yeah. But yeah, Fred Silverman, he was the one who brought it back and said, let's spice it up. And at the time when it was launched, the new version in 1973, it was referred to as Match Game 73.
Todd, that was such a good year. I can understand why they would do that.
I don't see it. But anyway, the title and the logo would change every year until 1979. So
the sign budget was getting out of hand.
Every year they had to change the sign. Match Game 74. Johnny Olson. Anyway, okay. So from 1975 to 1981, there was also an evening version where the celebrities, I think, were more drunk during that.
Oh man, that's our show. I think that's really where.
Exactly. I mean, that's the ancestors for our show, isn't it?
Yeah, and here we are today.
Yeah. There's some funny stories that go along with that I'll get into in just a second. But the show kind of continued to bounce around the different networks for decades, even as late as 2016 with a version that was hosted by Alec Baldwin.
Oh, I vaguely remember that now that you say that. Yeah. It was just kind of like in the background, right? I remember seeing the teasers for it.
Yeah. But I want to focus on that mid-70s version, the 73 to 79 version, because that was the grooviest time. And that was also selected by TV Guide as the 4th greatest game show ever. And it was even twice nominated for a Daytime Emmy.
Okay.
You want to guess the other ones while we're talking about the top 4 game shows of all time?
All right. When I think of game shows, when someone says game show, you mentioned Match Game popping into your head.
Yeah.
The first game show, iconic game show to me.
Yeah.
Is The Price is Right.
I would have thought that as well. It's not one of the top 4.
Really?
Yeah, I would have thought that too, because it's been around forever, right?
Yeah.
But you mentioned the word iconic. Number 1 game show of all time is Jeopardy.
Oh, well,
which I could see that.
You were given the answer. That's how you knew that.
Oh, well, I cheated, right?
Yeah.
What is Jeopardy? Sorry. The second one was Wheel of Fortune, and third was Family Feud, which actually has a connection to Match Game. I'll talk about in just a second.
Okay, this all makes. All of these shows are still around today.
Yeah, I would say, Price is Right has got to be up there too.
Yeah, I think about Bob Barker. Maybe it's me being from Cleveland, right? Since Drew Carey took it over, maybe there was something in the water in northern Ohio that just made us all love The Price is Right.
It's, there's,
I will say all my animals are spayed or neutered.
Okay, good. Thank you to Bob Barker for that. Look that up, kids. All right, well, let me talk a little bit about the host of Match Game. It was a guy named Gene Rayburn. Mm-hmm. He was actually born in Christopher, Illinois in 1917, and his real name is Eugene Peter Jeljanek.
Aside from knowing it's in Illinois, I've never heard of Christopher, Illinois.
I haven't either. Yeah,
okay.
I haven't either.
Okay.
And, he probably was wise to change his last name from Jeljanek to Rayburn. That was a little harder for people to pronounce, I think.
Yeah.
So he moved to New York City, and he was to be an aspiring actor and opera singer. Funny enough. But he was unable to find stage work, so he must not have been a good actor or opera singer. and he, too...
You know what? The Gong Show, had it existed then, he would have been welcomed with open arms, probably.
True. And here's a thread to pull on. He was also an NBC page and tour guide, so he and Chuck Barris may have been there at the same time.
How crazy would that be?
Wouldn't that be to go back in time and go like, hey, you're Chuck Barris, you're Gene Rayburn?
I think this is a lesson for today's youth. The road to future success is you got to figure out how to be a page at NBC.
True. I think so. I think if we go there today, we're going to see future superstars. But anyway.
Now get me a coffee.
Get me a coffee. Yeah. And then throw it at him.
Yeah. You call this coffee?
So after 3 years, he started bouncing around to various radio stations in New York, eventually landing at WNEW. He was known as the Howard Stern of the 40s back then.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, whatever that would be, but that's what he was known as. So I guess, maybe pretty popular disc jockey. He did enlist into the Army Air Force, and he served in World War II, which I didn't know about. Huh. But let me just wrap up here by telling you about that classic last name, Rayburn.
Yeah.
He actually chose it by randomly sticking his finger in the phone book, and that's the name that he found.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
So he actually lived on Cape Cod, but the show filmed in California.
Okay.
So every 2 weeks, he'd fly out from his home and do 12 shows over the weekend. Back to back, they would do 12 shows, and they would, of course, air, the next week or...
Even today, that's how a lot of syndicated game shows are done, for folks who don't know.
Yeah.
Jeopardy, I've actually known people who've been on Jeopardy.
Really?
And, they stack shows up. Wheel of Fortune, they stack shows up. They have wardrobe changes and everything like that.
Yeah.
The 3 shows that you mentioned as the top 3, Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, Family Feud, they're all doing that.
Yeah.
That's how Steve Harvey can host a game show but still do a comedy tour, be in a movie or whatever.
Okay. Well, shooting over 12 shows over a weekend, that'll play into kind of the shenanigans of the show in just a minute.
Ooh, okay.
But just real quick, as the host, he played this mostly straight, and that just kind of made those corny, risque jokes pop a little bit more.
Sure. He was oblivious.
You mentioned
to
on the Gong Show there was a memorable cast of characters, and there were some regulars also on Match Game. People like Richard Dawson, who was on Hogan's Heroes, and then he would go on to host Family Feud.
Absolutely.
Charles Nelson Riley, Broadway actor, director. He was in a Sid and Marty Krofft joint called Lidsville. Brett Summers, Nipsey Russell. You got to look up Nipsey Russell, kids.
Yeah.
And Rip Taylor. You mentioned Rip Taylor was also on the Gong Show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think this was his stock and
everyone,
trade,
if you don't know Rip Taylor, do yourself a favor. Look him up.
Yeah,
that was
dude.
beyond bizarre in the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
Burt Convey, Betty White, and another one of our sort of little pop culture threads, Marsha Wallace. So, Elliot, do you know who Marsha Wallace was?
I don't.
Okay.
Part of me, I think this is completely and utterly wrong. For some reason, I feel like Marsha Wallace was the person who played Roz on Night Court. I don't know why I think that.
That's not, but good guess. She was Bob Newhart's assistant on the Bob Newhart show. But audiences today would know her because she was the voice of Miss Krabappel on The Simpsons.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's so obscure. I'm probably the only one that would enjoy that. But if you know Miss Krabappel, you know Marsha Wallace.
Even Marsha Wallace doesn't have that on her website.
Yeah, right. It's not. All right. Real quick. Just to talk about how the game was played. So I mentioned when it came back in the 70s, the writers had a lot more fun than they did with the milquetoast version of the 1960s.
Oh, I'm
sure. So they would have. Yeah. So questions like, Mary likes to pour gravy all over John's blank. And then the audience would just giggle and giggle, and, the celebrities would like giggle and punch each other in the arm and stuff. And then contestant would say whatever, something would
potatoes.
Be like mashed potatoes, yeah. And then, of course, the celebrities would need to match that. Another one that I like, there are obviously thousands of questions.
Yeah.
Here's another one, and you can answer it. Did you catch a glimpse of that girl on the corner? She has the world's biggest blank. Like...
There are a number of things I could say, but they'll all just get me in trouble.
See, that's good TV right there. As you can imagine, the audience loved the more saucier implications and double entendres.
Oh, yeah.
But certain answers were off limits, mostly answers relating to genitalia.
Yeah,
Couldn't
see,
talk about that.
That's what I was mentioning when I said John's potatoes. Come on, Todd, keep up.
So, if a celebrity happened to utter a blue word, a card reading "oops" would show up over their card and over their mouth with a slide whistle sound to cover their...
Man, I love a good slide whistle dub.
I know. We'll put some in as sound effects here. But you could use safe synonyms like tinkle or making whoopee. And the humor came in the euphemisms. And that's what made... the humor of the show deeper than just the one note laugh. It was, people like, for instance, Mary liked to pour gravy all over John's carrots. And people would just laugh and stuff. Anyway, I mentioned that they filmed a bunch in a row, and you could tell the episodes that would air later in the week on Thursdays and Fridays because those were the ones that were filmed later in the day. And what they would do is they would have alcohol and food served throughout the day, and those were after the dinner break. And and Fannie Flagg, who was a regular celebrity panelist on Match Game, she once said, and I'm going to quote, Charles Nelson Riley and Brett Summers would have martinis and get a little loopity-doopity. So it just made the show go off the rails, right?
Can we change this podcast name to Loopity Doopity?
Loopity doopity, yeah. All right, let me talk a little about the look, because it was pure 1970s, my friend.
All right, hit me.
You mentioned some color schemes already, but you didn't mention orange shag carpet.
That's probably what I was lying on when I was watching the Gong Show.
It probably was, yeah. And they had, again, the dimensional panels that were kind of orange and tan. They look like rounded corner rectangles filled with glitter, like you said about the other one.
Yeah.
And tracer lights, right, everywhere.
No one had epilepsy, I guess, in the 70s.
Nah, they hadn't discovered that yet. This was the show that helped discover it.
Yeah, it turned out it was a medical drama.
Yeah. The contestants and the celebrity panel, they sat behind this sort of cream-colored desk that was accented with royal blue. So think like royal blue on an orange background. That was, color TV was popping then.
Yeah, it's like I can imagine people fiddling with their color adjustments and then just giving up. Like the knob falls off.
Donna, what's wrong with the TV?
Yeah.
It's too bright. It kind of reminds me, the aesthetic reminds me of this sort of groovy It's a Small World set.
Okay.
Like Mary Blair designed It's a Small World, and it was kind of, that was a little more highbrow, but anyway, I'm just going to let that linger. It just reminded me of the shapes and the glitter of it.
Okay.
But the set was designed by this guy named James Agassiz, and he said at the time, I submitted a color scheme that was not being currently used for a game show. Duh. In description, it sounds a little garish, but used in broad, bold strokes, it still achieved a style and taste level that appealed to Mr. Goodson, who is the producer, who was personally a very stylish and tasteful man. I don't care who you are. You're not going to wear orange glitter and blue together if you're personally stylish and tasteful.
I don't know. Say that to a Denver Broncos fan.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you got me on that one. All right. Well, you mentioned the Gong Show logo, which I think is pretty highbrow compared to the initial Match Game logo.
Oh, okay. I want to see. Okay. I want to hear this.
I don't know where to start with the 73 version. There's just a lot going on. None of the letters are the same size. So that's that. The word match is bigger than game and 73. It's hand drawn. I mean, I literally think it was hand drawn, like on a cardboard thing, and then they cut it out and made a sign and put lights on it.
Yeah. It's almost like first day of filming was coming, and someone's like, when are we gonna get the logo? When are we gonna get this name up? And some stagehand was like, oh shit. And then went backstage with
I got to draw this out real quick.
Cue card and a marker, and just like, here you go. Yeah.
They're like, Bobby, none of the letters are the same size. They're like, yeah, go with it, man. It's an orange background.
Who cares? Yeah. Okay.
And it feels a little psychedelic, actually, which could have been influenced by that. Of the time, not because they were doing psychedelic drugs, which I don't know about.
You never know.
You never know. And as I said, the sign had to be changed every year because of the name. But skip ahead a couple years, and they got this new look in 1979, and it was more angular, and it's probably the one you're going to see a lot more online. We'll include both of those on this episode page. And that new look was designed to coincide with the redesigned set. Oh. And as I said, it was more angular, the letters matched more, but there was a whole lot going on in that one as well. Think about these words, Match Game and 79. All the letters were clumped together. And the M, the A, the C, and the H were all on the same baseline, right? Okay. And the T was lowercase, but its baseline was halfway up the other letters. And it also formed this crossbar with the raised vertical of the H. I know my description makes it sound bizarre because it was, but think about this sort of weird glittery field goal, and then it had some letters crammed in between.
Okay, so goalposts. It's sort of like goal. Okay, I'm gonna need to see this, man, because this.
You definitely. There's a lot going on.
Okay, so I have a theory about this.
Okay,
a design theory. Around 1979, 1980, I remember, like, in the town I grew up in, there were like these, and I'm going to use this term in quotes, modern, unquote, style, like, houses. I had like a friend who lived in one of these houses. Yeah. Right on the lake, on Lake Erie. And it was like a suburban kind of house. It wasn't like it was some kind of mansion or anything like this. But the siding, like, it had these very narrow, tall windows, and the siding was wood siding, but it was put on a 45-degree angle. And then the roof lines had these pitches. Yeah. And then if you remember, like, go back and look up home computers. Like, I distinctly remember, like, Atari home computers, because I had an Atari home computer in the late 70s when I was busy figuring out BASIC and stuff like that. And it had diagonal buttons, like a row of buttons, like wouldn't be like normal keys. It was diagonal, and then like the vent slots would be. So there was this like industrial design language, architecture language that was all about like geometry or rediscovering geometry, but not like mid-century modern geometry, but like angular geometry. Now, I think, and you tell me, feel free to push back on this, I think it was because of the whole Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, futuristic space aesthetic.
Could be. Could be. That was what modern looked like at the time, was angular. It looked like Tomorrowland at Disney World.
So I think that dripped into just kind of almost like what it reminds me of was when the Gumdrop iMac came out and suddenly everything was clear, blue plastic desk lamps, bubbly staplers, but everything was made, it was translucent, and it was all happened to be in this Bondi blue. And then Apple came out with, the 5 different colors, and then magically all your office supplies were also in these coincidentally the same 5 different colors,
bright colors, and kind of bubbly aesthetic.
So I think that this, you know, what's interesting is I think this made it, the 70s, late 70s version of this made it onto game shows and made it onto television. So I think in a weird way it was trying to be more hip or futuristic or something, right?
I think you've got a point there, and this is related to that, but very different, which they both can coexist. Some of the other letters, like the diagonal leg of the A and the diagonal leg of the in both in match and in game, they join together and they extend well below, and it looks like a disco dancer. It's like this A forming this kind of kick out thing. And this was prime disco time, man.
Sure.
So I think that all of those kind of fit together. And what makes me think of that is we'll post also the theme music for Match Game, which was uber cool. It was super funky, and it just had the whole aesthetic going on at that time. So I talked a little bit about Alec Baldwin hosted the late version of Match Game. That heyday version from the 70s, it actually went off the air in 1982. And then Gene Rayburn, he struggled to find work after that. So, you know, he was kind of typecast as a talk show host. And the same fate happened to some of our other favorites, Mike Brady, Ginger Grant. You know, they just couldn't find the work that they were serious about.
Yeah.
Lastly, we can thank Match Game for Family Feud, because Richard Dawson, who was not very well liked on the celebrity panel, he went to the producer, Mark Goodson, and said, I want my own show. So basically they made a version of Match Game with just families playing against each other, and that became Family Feud. And, you know, of course, that's still on, as you mentioned, Steve Harvey.
But Steve Harvey doesn't kiss nearly as many people as Richard Dawson did when he was...
Yeah, they probably had to stop that after Richard Dawson.
Do you think it was halitosis?
I don't know what her name was, but they probably had to stop it.
But she complained.
Yeah.
So, Todd, all this talk about the fun they had on the sets of these game shows has gotten me thinking a little bit.
About me buying you another drink?
Oh, ding, ding, ding. Good answer. Correct answer. Let's cue the music, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. We'll be back for the next episode.
See you soon, everybody.